All right, everyone. Good morning and welcome to panel number 3, um, non-law enforcement strategies for community safety. My name is Shekera Algarin, and I am one of the deputy executive directors for the mayor's action plan for neighborhood safety. So I see a lot of faces that I recognize. You may recognize me, but if not, I'm sure we will meet eventually. So we have a great group of panelists today. And I just want to, I'm going to say their names. I'm going to give them an opportunity to introduce themselves as well. And then we're going to jump into our question and answer session. What I will ask, if you would be so kind as to put your questions in the chat, and we will get to them as we see them. So do not worry, we will not ignore you. We will get to these questions and we will make sure that the panelists that we have here today will provide this fantastic information, and we'll do our best to answer the questions and issues that you present to us. So our panelists happen to be, we have Mr. Khalil Cumberbatch. He is the Director of Strategic Partnership at the Council on Criminal Justice. We also have Ms. Ife Charles Hewitt. She is the Director of People and Culture at the Center for Court Innovation. We have Mr. Jason Hansman. He is the Senior Director for Crisis Response and Community Capacity at the Mayor's Office of Thrive NYC. We have the illustrious Chief David Barrere. He's the Chief of Housing at the New York City Police Department. And we have Executive Director Jessica Mofield from the Office to Prevent Gun Violence at the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice. So I'm just going to give the floor to them, and they can give you a little bit about their background, and then we'll go into the questions and answers. Mr. Cumberbatch, could you introduce yourself to our participants today?
Sure. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you for the introduction, Shakira. I'll be brief because I know we're running short on time. So as mentioned, my name is Khalil Cumberbatch. I am a New York City resident for the majority of my life. I grew up in a neighborhood called Southside Jamaica, Queens, which when we unfortunately talking about neighborhoods that have been historically disenfranchised and neighborhoods who have been starved of resources, Southside Jamaica, Queens is one of those neighborhoods. I'm also formerly incarcerated. I served 6.5 years in the New York State prison system, and so used that experience coupled with my experiences of growing up in Southside to really kind of help to shape my lens and perspective when we talk about community safety, when we talk about neighborhood safety, and particularly when we talk about ways that we can engage more productively with law enforcement entities. So thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. Mrs. Charles Hewitt, you have the floor.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me here on this panel. My name is Ife Charles Hewitt. I am a resident of Crown Heights, have been a resident for 40 plus years. Definitely interested in this particular topic and have done a lot of work around alternative ways to addressing violence using the kill violence model here in New York. Additionally, I am a mom who have lost a child, not to gun violence, but to an illness. But I'm also that mom in a village that have lost a lot of children to the justice system and that of gun violence. So I'm happy to be here and interested very much to talk to you guys.
Thank you so much, Mr. Jason Hansman.
Thank you so much for having me. I am a transplant to New York City, having been here just 10 years. Currently a resident out in Astoria, Queens. But I work for the Mayor's Office of Thrive NYC, working on both crisis response and community capacity. So, trying to help the city understand more ways to respond to mental health crises in the community, and implementing health only responses to those mental health crises. Before working at Thrive, I worked at the Department of Homeless Services, helping to reimagine how single adult shelter and specifically mental health shelters might deliver services, and worked before that in the veteran community on mental health initiatives.
Thank you so much, Chief David Barrere.
Good morning, everybody. I am so delighted to be here with you this morning. My name is David Barrere. I'm the Chief of Housing. Permíteme presentarme. Mi nombre es David Barrere y soy el comandante de vivienda pública del Departamento de Policía de Nueva York. Encantado de estar aquí con todos ustedes. Gracias.
Thank you, Chief. And last but not least, Jessica Mofield. Did we not bring Jess in? Okay. So maybe Jess hasn't joined us yet, but that's okay. We can move right along.
Hey,
So,
Sora, I'm here.
oh, there
I'm
she is.
sorry.
Thank you.
You said, having a little bit of issues with the technological advancements,
Yeah.
but happy Saturday, everyone. I am Jessica Mofield. I'm grateful to share this space with you all, and shout out to Chief Barrere for busting down that introduction in Spanish. I'm the executive director of the Office to Prevent Gun Violence. Our mission and our goal is really to have healthy, vibrant, beautiful communities through utilizing a multitude of different strategies that really utilizes community voice and tenets of procedural justice at the helm of what we do. By trade, I'm a licensed therapist, and my work is really rooted around narrative therapy, because I think it's important for us to understand that our narrative serves as an avenue and a vehicle for like the intersectionalities of our human experience. And without that, we won't be able to provoke empathy and change in each other. So I'm very delightful and grateful to be here with you all. Happy Saturday.
Thank you, Jessica. So I just want to ask the panelists, in the light of police reform, with everything that's going on, everything that we saw happen at the Capitol last week, we know that has to be some type of compromise and collaboration with law enforcement. But panelists, what is one thing that you think could improve community police relations in that dynamic?
If I could start, I think transparency. When we talk about what police and community relationships have been in the past, it's more so do as I say and not as I do, without being very clear about one, the intentionality, and as we kind of talked about in the last panel this morning, the impact of what those actions mean for community and what the ramifications are. And of course, discussions around, how to reform policing have been very important. And I think we're all at a point where we're beyond reform and we're looking for transformation. But it's really just around transparency, and the disciplinary matrix that was just released last week kind of speaks to that. When there are infractions, when there are things that happen in community. My niece wants to say hi. Hey, Bill.
Hello.
When there are things that happen in community, people want to know that there's an accountability mechanism and what happens beyond that. Is it just, desk duty? Is it just things are just cool, like things go back to normal? Because when things happen to people in community and they have a touch point with the justice system, their lives are changed forever. So understanding that there's a parallel track of what that looks like is important to know that there's not only this measure of accountability for a community, but it also works for public safety institutions that are not going to leave our communities anytime soon.
Okay, so transparency. Our other panelists, do you have something to add to that? I'm sure would be a lengthy list, but something else that you think would be in the top 5.
Yeah, I would just add, if I can, to just follow up on Jessica's points, to just say, one, I completely agree with everything that she said. Transparency is undoubtedly one of the key components at the core of unfortunately deep-rooted mistrust between community and policing, and for what it's worth, from policing towards community. And so I think transparency undoubtedly would help that. I would add that I think that in terms of policy recommendations, I would like to see a requirement more and more for police officers who are assigned to certain zones or certain districts, that they actually come from similar neighborhoods, that they come from that neighborhood in and of itself. We all know what the data has shown us 40, 50 years ago, where that was largely the way that it worked, meaning that police officers were largely assigned to a particular zone, a particular beat, a particular district, and they kind of knew the residents there. And this kind of, hammer to everything is a nail kind of mentality didn't necessarily apply. And so I think that if we were to start recruiting and start requiring police officers who were assigned to particular areas, that they came from those areas or similar neighborhoods or areas, I think that would help to build empathy towards the people that you are there to serve. Someone said on the previous panel, or maybe it was during the transition, that public service is service. And so, it is a reminder to us that our law enforcement entities are public servants and they are here to serve the community. I think that's one of the ways that that they could better serve.
Okay. So transparency and understanding that they're public servants. Okay.
I think to build on what Brother Khalil said and Jess said, I agree with both of them entirely. When you talk about to serve, it's, to serve and not be served, right? And I always think about when we think about police relations, there's a lack of continuous and consistent communication. There is a need for additional training, and there's an immersion into culture of the communities that they serve. I definitely agree with Khalil in regards to where it is that we are placing officers and who these officers are, not having a full awareness of the community that you are patrolling or the community that you are deemed to have to protect or to be in partnership with around safety. And I guess that's a big word. It's a partnership, because the total authority of the police department is not to govern the communities that they patrol, but in real life, it is to have a relationship and an understanding of those communities. So along with transparency, along with the fact that we need additional training, along with changing the policies, there needs to be this sense of an immersion into the culture of a community that you are patrolling, or that you are deemed to be the public servant to protect safety in that area.
Thank you, Ms. Charles. So Chief Barrere, can you expand on that? Because I think it's very interesting. Someone in our chat mentioned cultural competency. And so what do you think what's one thing that you think can be created to improve community police relations?
Right off the bat, I think, Jessica, you nailed it. And Khalil, everything I heard, I think you're right on the money. And transparency, what I didn't hear is really community partnership. I mean, we have to listen. I know that sounds very basic. We work, I want to go to Sir Robert Peel. Those of you who don't know him, he's really considered the father of modern day policing. And I don't want to give you a history lesson, but back in the 1800s, he had these very 9 basic principles. I encourage all of you, very easy to read, but he talks in one of his principles.
Thank you.
Touching on the police of the community, and the community are the police. We are all the police department. You mentioned public service, meaning that it's incumbent upon all of us to take care of our neighborhoods. And you're paying me and the police officer of that neighborhood to do what you can't do, or what you need us to do, and what you're directing, which is very important. I think that transparency, listening, partnership, and I think listening to the panelists, I think you're right on the money. I think that we haven't done enough of that. And I think in policing in general, I could speak for the NYPD and clearly the Housing Bureau, we have to do better. And, I started learning a new language 40 years ago for that reason. We talk about cultural diversity and trying to learn a language, and it's been amazing. It's been an amazing journey. And I think it's just incredible, and I'm delighted to be here with all of you today.
Thank you, Chief. So we hear transparency, we hear that they are public servants, we're hearing communication training, cultural competency, and Chief Barrere said community partnership. So if we could just maybe take that and make it a little bit more succinct. And how specifically can the police department improve their relationships with the residents of NYCHA? What do the panelists think about that?
I just want to jump into what Chief Barrere said, that intentionality is important, right? What he did 40 years ago, I think that's what you said, Chief Barrere. It's like 40 years ago that you learned the language to be able to speak of that in the community. Am I correct? That's what I'm hearing.
Four? Yeah, but it's still a good thing.
Well, thank you. That's impressive. Right, that's impressive, Chief. I don't know. I don't think I would have learned, I'm still trying to pick up on some stuff. But the fact that you took it to heart to learn the language, to communicate, that is the intro to building a relationship. You cannot build a relationship on assumptions. What you are putting your predisposed beliefs about people if you don't get involved and understand, right? So his intentionality of learning about community and learning the language to be able to then communicate is what needs to be real and true relationships. That is what it's about. So when you speak about NYCHA, the notion of NYCHA is that everyone that lives in NYCHA is horrible. They don't work. They're on the welfare system. So if I come and I approach that kind of behavior or bring that behavior to communicating with a NYCHA resident, I'm not coming in a space of love. I'm coming in a space of, this is what this building is representative of, and this is what these people are. And so again, I will always say it's the intentionality behind what real relationships are. And real relationships are not based upon perceived assumptions of a person or a community.
Excellent. So definitely understanding the intentionality and recognizing that these residents are individuals, they are people, and that it should be a partnership approach as opposed to an overlord approach, if you will. So I do think that's a very poignant topic that we do need to recognize. Does anyone else can think of anything specific that they would like for NYPD to do to improve the relationships with residents in NYCHA? Any of our other panelists?
I think it's also a recognition of the strength of community's power in being able to make decisions for a shared partnership. I think oftentimes when we kind of have these convenings, it's almost like, yeah, we're creating this table for other people to come to it. But I think actually allowing community to be a part of that infrastructure is so important, because if community is not considered to be a part of the action that's required once you identify the needs, we can have conversations for forever. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to address and or change the things that people are requesting and are asking for. So actually recognizing community as actionable partners to be able to make those changes that they recognize and see in partnership with the local commands or local enforcement is extremely important. Because without that, it's hard for people to find and recognize their power in a system that they didn't create.
Wonderful. I would just like to say really quick, just to remind our participants that if you do have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat and we will definitely ask them to. Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much, Jessica. So in light of that, does anyone have any questions at this moment they would like to ask the panelists before we move on to our next discussion topic?
Yes, I have a question.
Yes.
Jeanette Salcedo from Castle Hill. I'd like to know how is the NYPD gonna approach a different style of policing as far as, interacting with the community that they've already. We have issues in the Bronx where there's no open line of communication between the residents. I mean, we have our community policing. They're great, but when it comes to the other, because we have two separate entities that police Castle Hill. We have our community board, community police, and then we have our 43rd precinct, and they clash. So one treats us with the utmost respect, and the other one treats us like we're nothing, and it's very noticeable. It's an issue, and I'd like to know how that can be addressed, aside from everything that's already been spoken about.
Thank you for the question, and I'm hoping that the people that are treating you with respect are the people of the Housing Bureau. And either way, both the 43rd Precinct, NPSA 8 and PSA 7 wear the same uniform that I'm wearing. So I will take accountability and responsibility for both of them. We just, Keon Ramsey worked for me in housing, and he just took over the 43rd Precinct. I'd be shocked if you don't see, a tremendous amount of improvement in the community policing style. But let me just touch on what we've done so far. We rolled out our neighborhood policing strategy a couple of years back, and it's in full force right now. I'm really a big supporter of it. I get a lot of positive feedback from the community regarding that. COVID has put it's crushed us. It's really crushed a lot of forward momentum that I believe we had, including myself. I haven't missed a day of work. I've been at work every single day, but I haven't really been able to get out to the communities that I serve, not to get out, to touch, to, shake hands, to meet the people that I work for. And it's been incredibly difficult. I also feel that some of the people that I work for have become isolated as a result of it, because a lot of the people I work for do not have the technology that we have right now. What we're doing right now is incredible. And I want to thank MAP and NYCHA and everybody for running this today, because this is great. But I have elderly people that work for me that have problems that I have to send a neighborhood policing officer over to teach them how to call into a conference call. So COVID's really, it's been very difficult and challenging for us in the NYPD. But we rolled out, with that being said, we rolled out our youth coordination strategy to build on our neighborhood coordination strategy, to really bring it down to the youth level, to put cops on the ground that know our youth are in the same developments. They're in Castle Hill. They're assigned there each and every day with the sectors that work there. In terms of the 43rd precinct, they are going to treat the residents that pay my salary with the respect that they deserve to be treated. And I know Kean Ramsey personally, and I promise you that he will address any discrepancy or anything that should be addressed in terms of that. And I apologize that you, I'm sorry that you even feel that way, that the 43rd precinct treats you differently from the Housing Bureau.
Thank
You so much for that question. And I would just like to say to the group that Chief Barrere is dedicated to improving the map developments and improving the interaction. So we can definitely take that discussion offline and see if there's some different approaches that we can take after the summit. So thank you very much for bringing that up, and we will make a note of that. I would like to move on to our next topic because since we do have a very fantastic panelist from the Mayor's Office of Thrive NYC. Can we talk about the interaction of law enforcement with individuals who are having a mental health crisis? So we know in the past couple of years, there's been some negative results of those interactions. So are there currently any new procedures governing those interactions when 911 is called to the scene and someone is having a mental health crisis? Jason, could you touch on that for us if you don't mind?
Absolutely. And I think, what we're seeing, and I think what folks have known for a long time is that, police are not always the best response for mental health crises. They are the best response in some instances, but in some instances, what is needed is a health only response, or specifically a mental health response. So New York City is going to be piloting, really for the first time, a 911 response that sends a health-only response, that sends 2 EMTs, a social worker, to a scene to de-escalate, refer folks into community providers and community mental health, and get folks the help that they need without a criminal justice interaction. I think we're really excited about where this is going. A lot of the rest of the country is also moving in this direction, or has already moved in this direction. But I think, providing a different response, providing a different interaction when someone calls 911, when someone is having a mental health crisis, I think is critically important to kind of changing the way that people experience, mental health emergencies and mental health crises in the community.
Wonderful, thank you. And I see that one of our panelists just put in the chat that there is a pilot that is similar, possibly in North Carolina. So that is promising. Do we know if there are other pilots across the country that are doing this, that New York is maybe mimicking from, or not?
Yeah, the biggest one that I think everyone is following is out of, I mentioned I'm a transplant. I'm actually a transplant from the West Coast. Out of Eugene, Oregon. I'm not from Eugene, I'm from Seattle, but out of Eugene, Oregon, that has been doing this for a number of years, again with EMTs and crisis responders. But everyone from San Francisco to Chicago to Denver, to LA are really adopting this model, and me and my staff have been really going on a whirlwind Zoom tour across the country and talking to these models about how are they standing up, what are they seeing. I think a lot of folks are really looking to us in New York City as, how are we going to do it as the largest 911 system, largest EMS system, the highest volume of EDP or mental health calls. So I think a lot of folks are looking to us, but we're learning, I think, a lot about how folks are, deploying these mental health units, connecting folks to care afterwards. Because, what you do in the moment is I think, maybe just a sliver of what needs to be done, because that connection to care afterwards and making sure that individual doesn't, have another mental health crisis, or if another mental health crisis does occur, that they get the support that they need without potentially calling 911 is just as critical, just as important as that initial response.
Okay, all right. So let's, we do have a few questions in the chat, and let's see if we can turn this, thinking about that aspect, if we could turn this to what we could do to support the community responses that are starting in our communities or that have been there for quite some time. How can we support the community responses that come in to respond to what we consider to be safety issues before we bring in law enforcement? Can the panel speak to that?
Hi, Sandra from Bushwick. I think that in all fairness to everyone, I've been a resident of Bushwick for over 40 years, and we have to own up to our own responsibilities as well. We cannot just pass the buck to different things. We have to take initiative in doing things for ourselves and come together and then address what we need to address. We cannot just sit here and say that everything is happening because of whatever. Yeah, we are going through terrible times, guys. But as a community, if we don't put our best foot forward and become involved and give to our community so they can know what we want, teach them which way we want to go, then we can have a sit down with outside members, NYPD, whatever. But we have to get together as a community first and allow the healing, allow people to express whatever. And then we have an outside meeting where everybody can come in and be a part of, because in my community, before COVID, we had excellent plans set up. We had excellent plans with NYPD. We were either going to have a cooking thing with them, like we were really doing our thing. But of course, COVID occurred. But I think it's a joint effort. I'm not going to sit here and just, badmouth one group to no, it's a joint effort, because if we don't teach them, us, everyone, how to better get along with each other, the community, how can then they expect or respect anybody else trying to help? We have to teach them that.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were done. Go right ahead.
No, I am done. I am.
Okay. No. Sandra just brought up a fantastic point that there is a part of the responsibility does lie with the community. So it's 50-50. And so not only does it lie with the community, but it also, the other 50% lies with the organizations or city agencies that we are dealing with. So, I wanted to ask Mr. Cumberbatch, in reference to being a part of a community, what I like to call a community-focused organization, what are some of the non-law enforcement responses that you think could be brought up in the community or that can be supported by city agencies in reference to dealing with safety issues or responding to safety issues?
Yeah, I think that Jason was referencing the LEAD program out on the West Coast called Law Enforcement Assisted Diversion. LEAD is the acronym, which has really paved the way to say, hold on, stop. Someone calls 911. We have been traditionally sending law enforcement officers, and that all too often leads to outcomes that we did not intend by sending that law enforcement person. Now, that doesn't mean that all the time that that bodily harm happens, but it just means that that person may end up spending a night in jail and then ultimately referred to a substance abuse treatment program, or maybe ultimately sent to the hospital to receive mental health treatment. What they're saying is we're wasting resources when we do that, valuable resources. We need to recalibrate how we're thinking. So I think the LEAD program is one of the best across the country, and I'm happy to see that finally New York State has, New York City has deployed a system that, Jason said, it's a mammoth system when you talk about 911, law enforcement, EMTs, the healthcare system, and really 911 is at the crux of all of them. So I'm really happy to see that program. I think that Angela mentioned a notion or part of this kind of equation that I'm really happy she brought it up as someone who is engaged in her community in Bushwick, which is that we cannot expect accountability for everyone else except for ourselves. If we as a people are going to say accountability is important for us, transparency is important for us, coordination is important for us, empathy is important for us, then we have to get to a point where we say we will also practice and be disciplined in those things. Now, I think one of the underlying resources needed for that is financial capital. I know that the NYPD and other entities across the city have really found ways to divert money away from certain systems and into community programs, reinvesting into community ideas, particularly cure violence. But I think that there are many other ways that we could incentivize and really just give the financial resources needed to get some of the most bold ideas up and running. And then with that said, I would say that boldness is really needed. Chief Barrere and Angela and others have mentioned the role that COVID has played. And I think that one of the things that we can learn from the COVID pandemic is that we have to kind of embrace boldness. And boldness all too often comes with accepting ideas that aren't tried and proven. There is no evidence-based approach to trying new ideas. We have to be willing to say, yes, we will invest $500,000 a year for the first 3 years to this idea and see how it works. Because the reality is that we will never go back to a normal, what we knew prior to COVID. And because of that, all systems have been forced to rethink the way that they're doing things. Everyone from the federal government all the way down here to a city level. So we also have to listen to the communities. We also have to hear their ideas and say, you know what, we are willing to support that. And I say that knowing the financial times that we're in as a city and as a country, but the reality is that, New York City is one of the wealthiest cities in the country, if not the world. And so we really have to think about ways on how we take money that we're spending in certain areas and reinvest it into the communities, with the understanding that we have to be bold, and there will be times where those ideas will fail, but failure is not the end. And so I would push our elected officials to be bold in that sense.
Thank you, Khalil. Chief Barrere. So Khalil's talking about being bold. Can you tell us, is there boldness in the NYPD? Is there support coming from the NYPD to buttress and to highlight the non-law enforcement community response strategies that communities and community-based organizations are starting to invest in? Where does the Housing Bureau stand with that?
Absolutely. I mean, Khalil, I think what you just said, a lot of times people will call 911, they had no other option. So for instance, you might have somebody who's having a mental health crisis, and it's a mother who can't get her son to take medication. Is the NYPD the best to handle that situation? I can argue it. I can argue no. And I can also, we had a child up on a roof last night in one of our developments. And thank God we were able to rescue her. That's something that the NYPD should be handling. So I think a lot of times, we have to, balance and make sure that we're taking everything into consideration. I think Khalil had a lot of great points, as did Jason, in terms of we're not always the best equipped to handle emotionally disturbed persons. I'll be the first to admit it. I'll also point out that in my 30 plus years as a police officer, a lot of times when we're called to a mental health crisis, it's because it's reached that point where the police need to be there. And somebody's either the person who's in the crisis is endangering himself or others. So we need the balance. I think we have to strike a balance, and we're listening. I'll start with what we said. We're listening. I'm excited what we're doing right now. I'm excited to be part of this panel with everybody, and we have a lot of work to do.
Thank you, Chief Barrere. Just to follow up on that, to your knowledge, are there any specific efforts right now by the NYPD to support community-based responses to safety issues, or is that still under construction?
No, absolutely. The cure violence model is probably I spoke to Kay Bain yesterday, and actually the day before yesterday. Erica Ford, I mean, an incredible model. They're all partners. They do, listen, we have the same, I like to say it, we have the same goal. We want public safety. We just do it in very different ways. They take a community approach to it, and we're very supportive of it. Those are all partners. We work very closely with them. And that would be one that comes to mind right off the bat.
Shekera, if I could just weigh in for just a second. One, I just want to acknowledge Sandra for serving Bushwick excellence and realness on this panel, okay? But I think some of the core thing that I got out of what was shared is this connection to kinship. And, when we kind of talk about, things that are deemed as non-traditional and unconventional, it's very traditional to us as a people, as a culture. Because it's how we've thrived in communities for centuries. And in terms of, one, having like community-led approaches to public safety, I think in shaping community-led approaches to mental health responses, we also have to understand the cultural appropriateness of what works for certain cultures and what doesn't. Sometimes healing doesn't always find itself in this, Freudian perspective where someone is laying on a chase and sharing their issues, their spirituality. There have been studies that have said that, Black and brown men that have been incarcerated, have prevented, heart disease because of their connections with spirituality, based on the God of their understanding. And these kind of collective forms of healing and honoring and lifting up non-traditional practices of what healing looks like, what storytelling looks like for people, is important, because I think when it definitely comes to Black and brown communities and the disproportionate effects of gun violence in these spaces, our single consequence in our story and our narrative is that it's solely violence, and that violence is physical without recognizing that there's economic violence, there's emotional violence, there's social violence. And when Khalil kind of shared, kind of the need to kind of create our own way with the margin of error to make mistakes is okay. Because I think a lot of times what has been placed on communities in terms of evidence-based practices is that there's these Western normalities that kind of guide what that is without an appreciation of the people and where they come from and how that connects back. And I agree, sometimes there isn't evidence-based practice, but I think sometimes it creates the frame for how we do our work, but not necessarily for how it materializes and manifests itself in spaces in practice. So I think, again, this kind of overhaul that we're speaking of, to kind of acknowledge all of the things that make us beautifully human is important, where it's not just one thing over another, it's recognizing the pieces that work really well for all of us and adding those things together and having very strategic investments in how we stand up these opportunities and how we kind of support communities to have a clear role and defined role in what public safety looks like. I think the tradition of that has been, we invite babies and grandmas to meetings and we tell them about the crime statistics and they tell us about all of the horrible things of the world. And then it's like, we need more of this instead of this. But imagine if we actually, and you all have created to do this through MAP, like give the capital, the fiduciary responsibility to community in a way that allows them to have internal controls, that allows them the opportunity to be responsible, to be equal partners in justice, in public safety. I think that paradigm has shifted so much is because the capital, social capital and the fiduciary capital is always missing from that equation. So I think the way to kind of level out those playing fields and to really incubate innovation in a way that really allows for the department to have a partner that they can call on in its fullest capacity to show up and be responsive to communities the way that we deserve, is to actually have those extra added investments in infrastructure to build the people who are doing that work. So I think that's, someone said where the money resides, and that's on Mary Had a little lamb, okay?
On that note,
That's
everyone,
important.
we are actually at time, so they're going to ask you to leave the breakout room. Please give a hand to our fantastic panelists, Mr. Khalil Cumberbatch, Ms. Ife Charles Hewitt, Mr. Jason Hansman, Chief David Barrere, and Ms. Jessica Mofield. We could have talked about this for another 40 minutes.
That's right.
But I'm so glad that our panelists were here. I hope our participants got some good information and some takeaways from this, and we will send you back to the regular room. And thank you so much for attending today. Enjoy the rest of the summit. Thank you, panelists. We greatly appreciate your participation.